Hey there. Welcome to the third installment of the series in which I am telling you a little bit about each one of the books that I have published over the course of my career, starting from the very beginning. And we are now up to book 3. So the idea with this series is to tell the story behind each book, where it came from and what the inspiration was. So the last time I did Ashes Over the Southwest, that's book 2 of my career. And Ashes Over the Southwest was first of a pair. And it was 2 books that came out of the completion of my dissertation at the University of Oklahoma from the creative dissertation that I did in my PhD work there at OU. So the second book in the pair is called Suffer the Little Voices. So Ashes Over the Southwest was the first book of the pair, and the second book is Suffer the Little Voices. So in book 2, Ashes Over the Southwest was a little bit more regional. It was a lot more about home and Oklahoma, where I grew up, the people I grew up with, and the part of the country that I lived in. The second book in the pair is a little bit more of going into the religious aspect of where my life was at that time. I often have joked about being a recovering Baptist preacher's kid. I say that a lot when I speak and do events and things like that. And I think I am still. I think we're always, in recovery from whatever it is that we grew up with in some way, shape, or form. But what it is, so this book published in 2005, okay? So this was 16 years ago, and this book kind of dives into the point in my life when I was beginning to rethink, reimagine, wonder, question more than I ever had, the religious part of my life that I grew up with. Not so much at the time necessarily God, questioning God, or whether or not I thought Jesus was a pretty good guy, which I did and do. But it was really more of beginning to dive in and tackle the aspect of religion in my life. And so what I want to do is I want to read for you a few of the really definitive poems from the book. These are 3 poems. The first one I'm going to read for you in particular sort of was one of those. I mentioned, like in the last book, I mentioned a poem or 2, like the football God poem, what was it? The Work of Heaven, I think, was the title of the poem, and sort of mentioning it as being one of those poems that when I began to perform it, it sort of defined, in a way, helped to launch my career. One of my favorite memories with this poem in particular is the first time that I ever performed it at the wonderful event in Albuquerque, New Mexico called Sunday Chatter. And this was back when they were at the Cosmos venue, I think, or something like that. And it was, I've performed there so many times now, but this is maybe like the first, second, maybe third, but somewhere, time that I ever did the event. And when I read this poem, it just, the place fell out. There was a standing ovation. It was just one of the highlights of my of my career up to that point, and it was so meaningful. So this from book 3 here is definitely one of the poems that sort of defined the early part of my career. It is quite possibly the single most performed poem from my entire repertoire. So over all the years, I have most likely read this poem more than any of the others. So it's called Between Two Artists. Dear God, I have always admired your work, and were it not for that, I wouldn't bother you with this. But I must say, your installation piece at Point Lobos Nature Reserve, above Big Sur, simply goes too far. The Monterey pines are too tall. The cypresses too fanned out in perfection from trunks tied in intricate knots that would take centuries to unravel. The cliffs appear superimposed for dramatic effect, with impossible jags giving way to fairy tale caves that burst forth gushes of blue water like a French soda topped with cotton candy cream spray. The crash of waves and explosions of foam are too much like a Disneyland ride. There are too many kinds of birds, too many varieties of plants, and too much color in both, I might add. In short, it lacks integrity. It does not speak to the truth of the way things are, and I don't think viewers will trust or believe its authenticity. Now, normally I give a little bit of an explanation of this poem before I read the poem when I do live events. This time I wanted just to read the poem to you and then tell you the story of where it came from. I have never very much liked or cared for nor respected critics. The opinion that I hold, but just to be very honest with you, is that critics are more often than not failed artists. They are people who had wanted to be poets or wanted to be painters or wanted to be artists themselves, but couldn't seem to quite make the cut, and their work was never totally accepted or whatever it is. And so they're frustrated. And so what they do is they critique the art of others in order to give them a sense of importance within the artistic community. Well, it's one person's opinion, okay? So I decided that the way that I was going to give the critics my final word or tell them, what I thought about them was to pretend to be a critic myself. And I chose God as my artist that I would critique in order to make fun of them supremely. And, so anyway, it has gotten me in trouble at times, and as much of my poetry often has. But that's the way. So, in my word to the critics, it opens up, "Dear God, I have always admired your work. And were it not for that, I wouldn't bother you with this." And that's and that's how I chose to deal with that topic. Okay. So the second poem I want to read you from this book is a shorter one. This was a poem that all those years back, my friend Billy Crockett from Blue Rock, who I told you about in book 1, unfortunately had written the best piece of writing in the book. And it was his introduction to Hobson's Choice, which was book 1. And Billy Crockett's introduction was probably the best piece of writing in that book. But this is a poem that from this third book here that Billy had singled out one time. I noticed in a conversation or two that we had. It's a short one, and it's called Yap, with an exclamation point in the title. I'm afraid God may not be religious. Matter of fact, the further I get from religion's fiery core, the more it looks like a little angry dog yanking on the pant leg of divinity. Divinity leaning over, speaking gently, trying to help, but the little dog doesn't understand divinity's language. And so it just yelps and barks, and it ain't ever going to learn to sit or heel. It just yaps incessantly, because that's what little yappy dogs do. So there was one of my more blatant treatments of my thoughts on religion and the changes that were occurring in me, at this time. And it dives into that pretty thoroughly. The last poem that I want to read to you here from book 3 is a poem that I wrote for my dad. And it is also, I would say, from this time period in my life, that if I was reading from this book, or, the first 3 books even, or whatever, this was definitely one of the poems that I would read in a live performance. It's also been a highly published poem in a lot of different magazines and anthologies and things like that. And so this poem has had a wide life to it. So this one is for Dad. It's called On the Way. Dad's retired and on his way to pinch hit preach in Tulsa on an October Sunday morning. He has a certain coffee stop just before the turnpike, a favorite form of meditation. He pulls up to the window and reaches for the football-shaped rubber coin purse in his pocket that I remember playing with when I was 5 or so. She leans out. Morning. You all dressed up on your way to church? Well, actually, I'm on my way to Tulsa to preach this morning. Oh, so you a pastor? Yes. Well, would you pray for me right now? I got some negative people and thoughts in my life I need to get rid of. Dad says, sure. Then she asks for his hand. He reaches up. He prays. She squeezes. And I imagine myself into the car in line just behind him, seeing the white hand extended from the cuff of a white shirt, clasped by the 2 beautiful black hands at the ends of a gray uniform, and wonder if the sight alone would be enough to bow my head in worship with them. All right, so there you have it. Those are the 3 poems I wanted to give to you from book number 3, Suffer the Little Voices, of my career in writing. Now, there are 25 overall, so we have quite a few more of these videos to go. And I did want to mention something just very quickly at the end of this video. I do apologize for how absent I have been. I can do nothing except ask for forgiveness and for your long-suffering and understanding here that it just so turns out that I am moving my parents from Oklahoma down to Texas at the same time that I am moving my wife and dog and 2 cats up the road here in Wimberley to a place towards Blanco. And both of these moves are happening at the same time. Those of you who've ever done it know how stressful that can be. So the fact that I'm doing 2 moves at once, okay, so I'm hanging in there. I promise you we will be back with book number 4 before too long. In the meantime, the Pandemic Poems Project continues, and I am currently accepting commissions for book 5 of the Pandemic Poems Project because the fire pit sessions go on and the commissions go on. So if you would like to be a part of book 5, you can get with me on that. We'd love to have you along for that ride as well. Thanks for your patience, folks. Keep reading poetry. It's a little bit of sanity in a world gone completely mad. Namaste, y'all. See you next time.